Hey, welcome to Calvary Chapel San Jacinto and Revelation TV. Wednesday, July 8th, we have a guest speaker here at church, Amir Sarfati. He's coming over from Israel. Amir is a captain in the Israeli army. He's also a peace negotiator between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and he's an international speaker on terrorism. I encourage you to mark your calendars. July 8th, our Wednesday evening service. Amir will be here. Well, we're going to pick up today where we left off last week. And we were talking about the rebuilding of the temple, and it really is quite fascinating because also, since last week, a prince of Ethiopia had claimed to have possession of the Ark of the Covenant. Now we're going to look at the Ark of the Covenant next week on Revelation TV and see its significance in the placement of the rebuilt temple, the third temple. But when we left off last week, we noted Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. There's got to be a rebuilt temple because the Antichrist is going to step in and commit the abomination of desolation. Jesus confirmed that in Matthew chapter 24, verse 15, the abomination of desolation. Then we saw last week also in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4, that the Antichrist will sit in the temple and demand that he is worshipped as God. Now all this is significant, especially when you come to Revelation chapter 11. In Revelation chapter 11, verses 1 and 2, John writes and says this, "Then I was given a reed like a measuring rod, and the angel stood, saying, 'Rise and measure the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship there. But leave out the court which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the Gentiles, and they will tread the holy city underfoot for 42 months. So according to the book of Revelation, the temple obviously will be rebuilt, but it's going to be rebuilt somewhere on the Temple Mount. The outer court will be given over to the Gentiles. So how could this possibly take place, especially as we look at what's happening in Jerusalem today, the dividing of Jerusalem, some Jews wanting to rebuild the temple, Muslims up in arms if anybody mentions the rebuilding of the temple. Well, there's this article that was just released by Jerusalem Post, jpost.com. You can check it out. The title of the article is, "Who will authorize the rebuilding of the third temple? The Islamic Mahdi, the Sanhedrin being the 71 ruling members of the Sanhedrin in Israel, or a prophet." Significant that this topic is being discussed today. The temple hasn't existed since 70 AD, and here we are with all these interesting times. Everything seems to be pointing to the return of Jesus Christ. And over in Israel, they're talking about the rebuilding of the temple. So in this article, it says this: "A new Jewish interfaith initiative launched last week argues building the third Jewish temple in Jerusalem would not necessitate the destruction of the Dome of the Rock." Now, the Dome of the Rock is the dome, the place of worship for the Muslims there on the Temple Mount. And many folks are saying, well, the Dome of the Rock has to be destroyed in order to rebuild the temple. But we just read in chapter 11 of Revelation that the Jews will be able to worship in their temple, and the outer courts are given over to the Gentiles, where it will be treaded underfoot for 42 months or for 3.5 years. So the Dome of the Rock is there on the Temple Mount. How will they build this temple? Article continues, "God's Holy Mountain Vision Project hopes to diffuse religious strife by showing that Jews' end-of-days vision could harmoniously accommodate Islam's present architectural dominance on the Temple Mount." Then the article goes on, "This vision of religious shrines in peaceful proximity can transform the Temple Mount from a place of contention to its original sacred role as a place of worship shared by Jews, Muslims, and Christians," said Yoav Frankel, director of the initiative. So there's definitely Jews that are trying to figure out, how can we keep the Dome of the Rock Mosque in place, or the Mosque of Omar in place, and still have a temple built where the Jews can worship harmoniously, and Christians can come and visit, and also the Muslims will be able to worship at their dome. The article goes on, says, "However, both Muslims and Jews have expressed opposition to the initiative. Sheikh Abdullah Nimar Darwish, founder of the Islamic movement in Israel, said it was pointless to talk about what would happen when the Mahdi is the Muslim equivalent of the Messiah, when the Mahdi would reveal himself. He continues, why are we taking upon ourselves the responsibility to decide such things? Darwish said in a telephone interview with the Jerusalem Post, even Jews believe that it is prohibited to rebuild the temple until the Messiah comes. So what is there to talk about? The Mahdi will decide whether or not to rebuild the temple. If he decides that it should be rebuilt, I will go out to the Temple Mount and help carry the rocks. And then Darwish warned against any attempt to rebuild the temple before the coming of the Mahdi. As long as there is a Muslim alive, no Jewish temple will be built on the Al-Haram Al-Sharif, the Temple Mount. The status quo must be maintained, otherwise there will be bloodshed. So what's going to be the answer? We know that the Bible prophesies that the temple will be rebuilt. The Muslims say, no way will the temple be rebuilt unless the Mahdi shows up, their Messiah, who I believe is actually a prototype or perhaps even the Antichrist himself, according to Revelation chapter 6, the rider on the white horse. But they're looking for their Mahdi. The Jews are saying, no, it must be a prophet, or the Sanhedrin will decide if we can rebuild the temple. In the book of Revelation says the temple will be rebuilt and the outer court will be given over to the Gentiles. They can trample it underfoot. So how's it going to come about? Some have speculated the Dome of the Rock mosque might collapse under an earthquake, or after the Ezekiel 38 war, everything could be destroyed, so they'll be able to build their temple and the Muslims won't be able to object to it. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. What's interesting is there's a dome on the Temple Mount, and there are some who believe that this dome is the place where the Holy of Holies was with the original temple. Now listen to this. The dome of this dome that's on the Temple Mount, not the Dome of the Rock Mosque, but this dome is about 100 meters north of the mosque. And in 1983, after 16 years of studying the Temple Mount area, an archaeologist at Hebrew University named Dr. Asher Kaufman came to an interesting conclusion, and you can find it in the 1983 March-April issue of Biblical Archaeological Review. In it, Dr. Kaufman declares that while the Mosque of Omar, or the Dome of the Rock Mosque, has been assumed to sit on the Holy of Holies site, the true location is actually 100 meters north. Now, this is very interesting. Now, take a look at this gazebo that's up on your screen, and it might look fairly insignificant, but in the same area that Omar built the mosque, the Muslims, not the Jews or the Christians, the Muslims built this gazebo and gave it two names. Now listen to these two names: the Dome of the Spirit and the Dome of the Tablets. And underneath this gazebo is a flat rock that is now believed by many to be the foundation rock for the Ark of the Covenant. Now, what is so significant about this is the Muslims gave this place where the gazebo sits, they gave it the name of the Dome of the Tablets, also the Dome of the Spirits. So what was in the Ark of the Covenant, where many believe sat directly beneath this gazebo on this flat rock? Well, in the Ark of the Covenant was the 10 Commandments. Hence, the Dome of the Tablets, given the name by Muslims. And what was over the Ark of the Covenant? The Shekinah glory of God. Hence the Spirit of God. Hence the name that the Muslims gave this gazebo, the Dome of the Spirits. So quite fascinating. I have a lot more to say about this. We're going to talk about the Ark of the Covenant next week, especially since it hit the news just the other day and the Jews want to rebuild their temple and all this opposition going on. So that's going to be coming up next week. Wednesday, July 8th, we have a guest speaker here at church, Amir Sarfati. He's coming over from Israel. Amir is a captain in the Israeli army. He's also a peace negotiator between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and he's an international speaker on terrorism. I encourage you to mark your calendars. July 8th, our Wednesday evening service. Amir will be here. Until next time, God bless you.